What's going on YouTube, and welcome back to another KingJvpes video. Now, as mentioned folks, today we're going to be talking about the Pentax 6.7, and I thought I'd finally come full circle after 1 year of owning the camera to do a comprehensive review. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about... There you go. Alright, so what you guys just saw was filmed last week, and I wasn't completely satisfied with the way it turned out, so I wanted to kind of remake that entire video. I really want to focus on some of the essential functions as well as who this camera is for, and whether or not, it's worth maybe even just coming from 35mm film over to medium format. And the reason why I want to touch on that is because I feel like a lot of people who are getting into medium format are looking at different cameras, and the 6.7 is always one of the first choices. And so I want to put that into perspective as well for the folks that might just want to switch over from 35mm to 120 and tell you guys if it's worth it or not. So without further ado, you guys, let's go ahead and jump in and let's talk about some of the essential functions and main features on the Pentax 6.7. Alright, so the first thing I guess we're going to talk about is just the size and how gigantic this camera is. Now, I don't know the exact weight. Somebody really quick, drop that in the comment section down below. I don't know the exact weight, but I know for a fact that this thing is freaking heavy. If you look at the camera, man, it's as big as my head, and when compared side by side to the Minolta X700, it just makes the X700 look like a little plastic toy. There's a lot of metal parts on this, and that results in a heavy camera. Now, a lot of people who are wondering about how the 6.7 handles and functions, it's just like any other 35mm film SLR, except that it's double the size, like we just talked about. Now, with that said, you're shooting 120 film, and 120 is just a larger negative compared to 35mm. And the benefits of shooting 120 over 35mm is that the larger negative is going to have more detail to capture. So you'll often see that 120 film looks a lot crisp, it looks a lot sharper. And if you are looking for something like that out of film photography, making the jump over from 35mm to 120 can be a good idea, but you need to take into consideration that there is going to be a notable size difference because of the bigger camera body. So let's take a quick little tour over the Pentax 6.7. Now, on the top right corner, you have a very standard frame counter, and this is going to be the same that you would find on other SLR cameras. It's also connected over here on top to the advanced lever. Your shutter button here is threaded as well, so you can have soft shutter release buttons, or even just a long, what the hell do you call them? A cable release for anybody out there who is interested in shooting long exposures and landscapes. Moving over to the left side of the camera, you have your shutter speed selector wheel. Now, this camera maxes out at 1/1000th of a second, which is very standard among film cameras, and it also has bulb mode. You guys might notice that on my 6.7 I have what we would call I think it's called the TTL prism, and it's a prism that has a built-in light meter. That's essentially all it is. And the way you can tell between a TTL prism and just the regular prism is that there's this little bar here at the top, and when you see that, you should know that the prism has the light meter built into it. Now, the prism is removable. There's two little buttons here on the side, and you can go ahead and just pull that and take it off. And when you do that, it exposes this gigantic focusing screen. Just being able to see that image here just on that little focusing screen is magnificent, man. It makes the shooting experience of the 6.7 worth it. I don't really know, man. You got to see it in person to really appreciate it. Now, before we move on the top of the 6.7, there's a little chain right here. And this chain kind of interacts here with the prism. And what this allows you to do is it allows the prism to know what aperture you're shooting at. So one thing that a lot of people have been informing me about ever since I picked up this camera was that you need to make sure you attach the prism correctly, because if you don't, that little prism inside is gonna snap, or excuse me, that little chain inside is gonna snap. Now, here's how to reattach the prism the correct way. You can take your lens on and off. As long as the prism is attached, you can take it on, you can pull it off, put different lenses on, that's fine. But the minute you take your prism off, you need to make sure that your lens is not attached. You want to take your lens off first, and you always want to reattach your prism before you put your lens on. And that's just going to prevent the little chain inside of there from not snapping. Now with that being said, the lens that I have on this camera is the Pentax 105 2.4, one of the most highly regarded lenses in the film photography community. A lot of people like this lens for the out of focus rendering, you know, the bokeh some people will call it, and just overall the subject separation when shot wide open. And I have to say, man, it's a pretty special lens. It lives up to the hype for sure. Now, there's a lot of different lens choices out there for the Pentax 6.7. And for anybody who's afraid of just picking up this lens because it's equivalent to like a 50mm, there are other lens options out there for landscape shooters, for portrait shooters, and there's even a lens like a 150 2.8 that's really good. Now inside of the camera you have that gigantic mirror, and that mirror just sounds crazy when you take a photo. Listen to this. It's freaking huge. So if you are trying to be stealthy in something like street photography, you're gonna be heard for sure. But I mean, I don't think anybody's gonna shoot 6.7 street photography anyways. But the 6.7 that I have is the MLU version, which is the mirror lockup. And Pentax put that feature in there for people who want to shoot landscapes and long exposures, because a lot of people were complaining that when you kind of trip the shutter, it kind of rocks and shakes the camera because of how big that mirror is. So Pentax included a mirror lockup feature, which is this little button on the side for you to be able to pop up that mirror. So now when you're shooting in bulb, for example, you can go ahead and take the photograph, and this camera essentially just becomes a leaf shutter. So the shutter will open up. The mirror won't have to plop open because it's locked up with the mirror lockup feature, and that mirror will come down once the shutter is let down. So really cool and useful feature, especially for landscape photographers. Now the Pentax 6.7 does take a battery, and the battery that it uses is the same PX28 battery that you use in your Canon AE1 program, or even like the Canon A1. Now it's not a really hard battery to find, but the fact that the 6.7 does take battery could be a turnoff for a lot of people. But just take a look really quick, folks, at how big that freaking shutter is, man. That shutter curtain is huge, and something that I really try my best not to do is touch that shutter curtain, because there are a lot of people who have the 6.7, and one of the known problems is that the shutter curtains can easily get damaged. So always be careful with the shutter curtains if you are planning to pick this camera up. But other than that, that's pretty much the entire camera. One thing that I do want to touch on is this little 3D printed grip that I picked up online on eBay. I'm gonna link that in the description below, because without this grip, the camera becomes almost like a book, almost like a brick essentially, and there's nothing really to grip to. And when you attach this grip to it, it really makes this camera feel good in your hands. And this is the right-handed grip, and usually the 6.7s you're gonna see the wooden grips, but it's on the left side, and I don't really see a purpose in kind of shooting that. It's like kind of having a steering wheel. So I would definitely recommend the right hand grip over the left hand grip. Alright guys, so it's time to talk about who this camera is for. But the big question is it worth it to jump from a 35mm SLR over to a medium format Pentax 6.7? And the answer really comes down to what you're going to be doing with the camera. If you are a casual shooter and you're just looking for a camera to maybe take photographs of your friends with, and you're not doing anything too serious, I think a 35mm SLR like the X700 and a couple of good lenses is going to be worth it. It's going to cost a lot less than picking up the 6.7, and you're going to get more frames per roll, because with the 120 film on the 6.7 you get about 10 frames, I believe. But if you're someone who's been shooting 35mm film for a while and you want to just try something new, I think, you know, the 6.7 is a very good option for your first medium format film camera. It's a little bit heavy, and as long as you can handle the size and the weight, the 6.7 is a solid first choice. You can't go wrong with the Pentax 6.7, man. It's just an iconic camera, hands down, and it'll go down in history, in my opinion, as one of the greatest cameras ever made. Now, in terms of who this camera is geared towards, I don't think this camera is geared towards, obviously, people who want to have a camera that is very lightweight and mobile. So street photographers, I mean, you can make it work, but for the most part, just the loud shutter itself is going to be kind of a turnoff for me. And when you have a big camera out on the streets, it can look a little intimidating to people, especially if you're doing something like street photography. Now, when it comes to something like portrait photography or landscape photography, the 6.7, the Pentax 6.7 is a great option for that. You know, the lenses for portraits are really great. The 105 2.4, the 75mm f4, even the 55 2.8. There's a wide variety of lenses out there to shoot the 6.7 with to make some really amazing looking portraits. And also for landscape shooters, man, having a camera like this to shoot a 6x7 negative, it's just incredible, man. All of the detail, like from the Yosemite trip that I took last year. It's crazy how sharp these lenses are, and when combined with 120 film, it makes for a really good landscape camera. Now, in terms of pricing, you can pick up a Pentax 6.7 MLU, which is the model that I have, for around $400 to $500 on eBay used. If you look around, you can pick up the 105mm lens anywhere between $100 to $150. A fair price would be anywhere between $500 to about $800, of course, depending on condition of the lens and the body itself. But to conclude my review on the Pentax 6.7, the only thing that I can say that would probably be a negative about this camera is the overall size and the weight. And I know I sound like a broken record, but if you can look past that, then I think that this is probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, 6x7 medium format camera of all time. So that's going to wrap it up for my review on the Pentax 6.7. Thank you guys so much for tuning into another video. And if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns about the 6.7, comment down below and I'll try to get back as soon as possible. So thank you guys for tuning in again, and I'll see you in the next one. As always, just for this video, Pentax gang.